Amara's heels struck the marble floor, echoing through Bean Bliss as she moved with quiet purpose. The shop's chrome counter distorted her reflection, but her posture never faltered. Whitlock, behind the register, gripped his coffee cup, a little too tightly, knuckles paling as he watched her approach. The barista, caught mid-pour, froze, milk pitcher hovering in the air. Steam hissed from the espresso machine, filling the space between words with a tension everyone could feel. Whitlock asked a question, his voice stiff. "Need something?" Amara responded evenly. "A latte. Oat milk, please." Her tone was calm, but the clutch in her hand creaked under the pressure of her fingers. Whitlock's gaze flickered from her expensive bag to her skin, jaw working as if he was chewing on something bitter. The barista adjusted her apron, eyes darting between the two, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. Whitlock's reply was clipped, "Out of oat milk," as he wiped the counter in a slow circle where Amara's hand had rested. A customer nearby angled their phone, quietly recording the exchange. Amara, unfazed, pointed at the menu board, her nail tapping the plastic. "Your menu says otherwise?" The tap made Whitlock flinch, but he didn't answer. The shop seemed to shrink, the weight of old wounds and unspoken history pressing in. Amara's breathing stayed measured, but her heart pounded in her chest. In the background, a clock ticked, marking time like a warning. Her phone buzzed with a notification, breaking the moment. She slid it across the counter, letting the corporate logo glow in the light. Whitlock's wedding band clicked against the register, a nervous tick. The barista's pitcher slipped and shattered on the floor, but no one moved. Amara's stillness spoke volumes. She looked Whitlock in the eye and said quietly, "You're fired." The words cut through the room, and as she turned, sunlight caught her blazer, casting her in a sharp silhouette. Whitlock's reflection fractured in the chrome, a man unraveling as power shifted in a single silent moment. Before the story continues, please let us know from where you are watching this video. Write your city or country in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like if you believe in stories that challenge injustice. Your engagement gives power to voices that need to be heard. Whitlock leaned over the register, his grip tightening as Amara stood calmly on the other side of the counter. The open sign glowed behind her, but his words cut through the air. "We're closed." His voice was flat, but his eyes flickered with something sharper. Amara didn't move, her clutch pressed close to her side, knuckles pale. The barista, still by the espresso machine, hesitated, glancing between the two. The air was thick with the scent of burnt coffee beans, a bitterness that seemed to seep into every corner. A customer at a nearby table lifted their phone, quietly recording, their screen reflecting the tension that had settled over the shop. Whitlock wiped the counter where Amara's hand had grazed, his movement slow and deliberate, as if erasing her presence. Amara's gaze didn't waver. She nodded toward the glowing menu above, her voice measured. "Your hours say you're open. I'd like to order." The barista's hands shook as she set a clean cup on the tray. The only sound, the soft clink of ceramic. Whitlock forced a tight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not today," he said, his tone final. The customer with the phone shifted, catching the exchange in a single, silent shot. Amara's jaw set, but she remained composed, her dignity unbroken. The line between them was invisible but unmistakable, a boundary drawn by years of habit and unchecked power. The barista's eyes darted to Amara, a flicker of apology in her expression, but she said nothing. In that heavy pause, the shop felt smaller, as if the walls themselves had moved closer. Amara's presence was steady, her restraint a quiet challenge. The moment lingered, charged with the knowledge that something fundamental had shifted. Even if no one dared say it aloud, Amara's phone vibrated on the counter, its screen lighting up with a corporate notification. Bean and Bliss, quarterly report ready. She didn't flinch, but the glow caught Whitlock's attention. For a moment his face drained of color, eyes darting from the logo on her phone to her steady expression. The barista, hands slick with nervousness, reached for a mug and fumbled, sending it crashing to the floor. The sharp crack of porcelain made everyone freeze. Customers turned, whispers rippling through the shop as the fragments scattered across the tile. Amara didn't move, her stillness drawing a different kind of attention. Whitlock's lips parted, but no words came. The customer with the phone kept recording, their gaze fixed on the unfolding scene. Amara angled her phone so the screen faced Whitlock, the company's branding unmistakable. She didn't have to say anything. The implication was clear. Whitlock's hand hovered over the register, his fingers trembling. The barista stooped to gather the broken pieces, her face flushed, eyes flickering up at Amara with a mix of worry and something like hope. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent accusation hanging between every heartbeat. Amara's calm presence seemed to fill the space, her authority growing with every second of Whitlock's hesitation. The customer at the window leaned forward, sensing the shift, their coffee forgotten. Whitlock tried to recover, clearing his throat, but his voice caught. "Is there a problem?" he managed, but it sounded thin, uncertain. Amara's eyes didn't leave his. Her phone, still glowing, was a quiet threat, a promise that the truth was no longer hidden. At that moment, the power in the room shifted, and everyone felt it. The shop was no longer just a place for coffee, it was a stage for something much bigger. Amara reached into her bag, her movements unhurried, and drew out a single business card. The card's black font stood out against the white, the title clear: CEO, Bean and Bliss, Franchise Group. She slid it across the counter, her hand steady, her gaze never leaving Whitlock's face. He stared at the card, confusion flickering across his features before realization set in. His wedding band tapped the counter as he picked up the card, the sound sharp in the quiet shop. The barista, watching from behind the espresso machine, covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide. Outside, the faint sound of sirens drifted in, a background hum that seemed to underscore the moment. Whitlock's jaw tightened, his authority slipping away with every second the card sat in his palm. Amara's voice was soft but unwavering. "You're fired." The words landed with the weight of a verdict, not a threat. The barista let out a breath she'd been holding, her shoulders dropping in relief. A customer near the door looked from Amara to Whitlock, then back again, sensing the shift in power. Whitlock tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He set the card down, fingers leaving a faint smudge on the surface. Amara didn't move, her presence filling the space between them. The barista glanced at her coworkers, a silent question passing between them. "Is it really over?" Amara's eyes remained on Whitlock, her expression calm, almost gentle, as if she were giving him a chance to understand the new reality. The sirens grew louder for a moment, then faded. Whitlock's shoulders slumped, the card still in front of him. The shop was quiet. The only sound was the hum of the espresso machine and the distant city outside. In that stillness, everything changed. Whitlock stared at the business card, his thumb smearing the ink as he gripped it too tightly. The espresso machine rumbled in the background, its steady drone louder than any words he could muster. Amara stood a few steps back now, her posture relaxed, as if she had always belonged in that space. Sunlight streamed through the shop's front window, catching the edge of her blazer and casting a sharp outline along the floor. Whitlock's breathing grew uneven. He looked around, searching for support, but the barista avoided his gaze, busying herself with stacking cups, her hands trembling only slightly now. A customer by the window glanced up from her laptop, eyes meeting Amara's for just a moment before she offered a small, approving nod. Whitlock tried to steady himself, but his voice faltered. "You can't just—" He stopped, the sentence, unfinished, hanging in the air. Amara didn't answer. She simply turned, her heels clicking against the tile as she moved toward the door. The sound was crisp, final. The barista exhaled, relief softening her features. Whitlock's reflection in the chrome of the espresso machine looked back at him, distorted and unfamiliar, a man reduced to a question mark, not an answer. The customer with the phone lowered their device. The recording done. Their attention shifting to Amara as she paused at the exit. For a heartbeat, the entire shop seemed to hold its breath. Amara glanced over her shoulder, her expression composed, then stepped out into the sunlight. The door swung shut behind her, the bell chiming once, clear and bright. Whitlock remained at the counter, the card limp in his hand, the hum of the machine filling the silence left behind. Power had shifted, quietly and completely, and everyone in the shop knew it. The glow of Amara's laptop lit her face in the darkness, casting long shadows across the kitchen table. She scrolled through contracts, her finger pausing over a clause labeled demographic alignment. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, tired and raw. They said no, called it risky. I just wanted a fair shot. Amara blinked hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, each second a reminder of how much she'd given up to reach this point. Her phone buzzed with another email from the franchise board. The subject line read, "Final approval pending." She opened the message, reading the words twice. The language was careful, but the meaning was clear. They wanted her name on the paperwork, but not her presence in the store. Amara pressed, her pen to the contract, hesitating. Outside, the distant wail of sirens drifted through an open window, reminding her of the night police raided her father's grocery store. She remembered the look on his face as he packed up the last of the canned goods, pride replaced by resignation. Amara's hand shook as she signed her name, the ink smudging slightly as a tear landed on the page. A video call notification popped up. The franchise attorney appeared, voice clipped and efficient. "We just need your signature, Ms. Hughes. Everything else is standard." Amara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is it always this hard?" The attorney didn't answer, just smiled tightly and ended the call. Amara sat back, staring at the signed contract. The kitchen felt colder, the light from her laptop harsh. She closed the lid, her reflection briefly visible in the black screen. Determined, she whispered, "No more hiding." The deal was done, but the cost lingered, heavy and unspoken. Amara sat at her desk, the blue light of her monitor flickering across her face as she scrolled through old Yelp reviews. Her search was methodical, each click uncovering another piece of a story she already suspected. She paused on a review dated 2 years ago. "Manager called the police on my son for sitting too long. He just wanted to finish his homework." The words were blunt, the pain behind them obvious. Amara's hand hovered over the mouse, her breath catching as she realized how many similar complaints had vanished, deleted or hidden by the system. She took a screenshot, her fingers trembling. Whitlock's staff photo appeared next to several of the reviews, his smile stiff, eyes cold. Amara leaned closer, reading another post. "Told us there was no seating, but let others in right after. The pattern was clear, but the evidence was scattered, buried beneath layers of curated positivity." The barista's name popped up in one comment, a customer mentioning her kindness as she slipped a free cookie to a crying child. Amara made a note of it, determined to remember the small acts of decency that survived in the cracks. Her phone buzzed with a message from a friend. "Did you see what's happening at the store?" Amara replied, "I'm looking into it. There's more here than anyone wants to admit." She scrolled back further, finding reviews that had been marked as not recommended, the stories of exclusion pushed to the bottom, out of sight. Each one felt like a piece of her own history, a reminder of how easily injustice could be swept away. As she closed her laptop, Amara's resolve hardened. The truth was there, hidden but not erased, and she was done letting it stay buried. She stood ready to bring those stories into the light. A crumpled resignation letter sat on Amara's desk, the ink bleeding through thin paper. She unfolded it carefully, reading each word. "I can't keep watching black kids treated like criminals. This isn't what I signed up for." The signature at the bottom was shaky, the pen strokes uneven. Amara's eyes lingered on the name Derek, the night guard. She remembered his quiet nods in the hallway, his habit of humming old soul songs on late shifts. She opened the security footage Derek had attached. The video showed him handing a cup of coffee to a teenager, the boy's backpack, slung over one shoulder. Derek smiled, offered a fist bump, then walked away, leaving his badge on the counter. The timestamp matched the night the police were called for loitering. Amara watched as the boy sat alone, sipping coffee, until Whitlock appeared on screen, arms crossed, voice raised just enough to be heard over the hum of the espresso machine. The boy gathered his things and left, head down. Amara's chest tightened. She replayed the footage, focusing on Derek's small act of kindness, the way he lingered a moment, as if hoping someone would notice. She glanced at the letter again, the words "I quit" underlined twice. The resignation wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was honest. Derek had chosen conscience over comfort, even if no one else had seen it. She placed the letter in a folder marked Evidence. Her hands steady now. The truth was accumulating, piece by piece, in small gestures and quiet departures. Amara knew these moments mattered. Each act of resistance, however subtle, was a crack in the foundation Whitlock had built. She closed the folder, her resolve deepening. The fight was far from over, but she was not alone. Amara sat in the dim light of her living room, scrolling through a string of text messages she'd recovered from the store's backup files. The words glowed on her screen, each one a window into Whitlock's mindset. "This area's getting too, he'd written to a friend. The ellipsis hung there, heavy, needing no explanation. Amara's jaw tightened as she read the reply. "Yeah, you gotta keep the place classy." The conversation was casual, almost boring, but every line stung with the weight of what was unspoken. She zoomed in on the timestamp. It was the same day she'd finalized the franchise paperwork, the same day she'd walked through the shop with hope in her chest. She remembered the way Whitlock had greeted her then, a handshake that lingered just a second too long, a glance that seemed to measure and dismiss her all at once. Now, reading his words, the memory soured. Her phone buzzed with a late-night message from Elena, the barista. "You okay?" Amara typed back, "Just working late." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for staying." Elena replied with a single heart emoji, a small gesture that meant more than she could say. Outside, the streetlights blurred in the rain, their glow distorted by the window pane. Amara leaned back, letting the phone rest in her lap. The texts were proof, but they were also a reminder of how easily prejudice could hide behind routine, how bias could slip through in the quiet moments when no one thought they were being watched. She saved the messages, labeling the folder Pattern. The evidence was building, and with it, her determination. The darkness outside pressed close, but inside, Amara's resolve burned brighter than ever. Amara queued up the security footage, her finger hovering over the play button as she braced herself. The screen flickered to life, showing a series of short clips. Each one a different black patron approaching the counter. One woman asked for a refill, only to be told, "We're out." Another man waited patiently, then watched as someone else was served ahead of him. A teenage girl handed over cash, received change, but no smile or thanks. The pattern was unmistakable, the dismissals subtle but relentless. She paused the video on a frame where a woman's shoulders sagged after being turned away, her disappointment clear. Amara's breath caught. The posture was painfully familiar, echoing her mother's stance after being denied a loan years ago. She scanned the timestamp. This was the same week she'd taken ownership of the franchise. The realization stung, a reminder that her presence hadn't stopped the old habits from continuing. The next clip showed a young man being charged extra for the same order the customer before him had just received at regular price. He hesitated, counted his change twice, then left without a word. Amara noted the barista's nervous glance toward Whitlock, who stood in the background, arms folded, watching everything but saying nothing. She let the footage play out, each vignette adding to the growing file on her laptop, labeled Proof. The shop's background noise machines whirring, chairs scraping was a constant backdrop to these small, persistent acts of exclusion. Amara's hands tightened on the edge of her desk. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern, a system working exactly as it was designed. She closed the laptop, her resolve hardening. The faces on the screen stayed with her, each one a reason to keep fighting, each one a silent demand for change. Elena approached Amara during a quiet lull, her steps hesitant, eyes darting to make sure Whitlock was out of sight. She reached into her apron and pulled out a napkin, edges wrinkled and stained with coffee. Pressing it into Amara's palm, she whispered, "Read this later." Amara nodded, slipping the note into her pocket without a word. The exchange was quick but loaded, a secret passed hand to hand in plain sight. Later, in the back office, Amara unfolded the napkin. The words were scrawled in hurried script. "He trashes orders if POC walk in. Says it's bad for business. I'm sorry." The ink had bled in places, but the message was clear. Amara's jaw tightened as she reread the note, the weight of Elena's confession settling in her chest. It wasn't just a rumor or a suspicion anymore. It was a fact, written in desperation and guilt. Amara thought back to Elena's nervous glances, the way she always seemed to linger near the register when certain customers entered. She realized now that Elena's small acts of kindness, a free cookie, an extra shot of espresso were more than just good service. They were quiet acts of resistance. She tucked the napkin into her folder of evidence, her hands steady. Elena's risk was real, and Amara knew it. The truth was messy, stained, and imperfect, but it was finally in her hands. She glanced at the closed office door, listening for footsteps. The shop outside buzzed with routine, but everything felt different now. Amara understood the cost of speaking up, and she was grateful. With every piece of evidence, her resolve grew. The walls that protected Whitlock's authority were starting to crack, and Amara was ready to push harder. The lawyer's office was dim, lit only by the glow of a desk lamp that stretched shadows across piles of paperwork. Amara sat opposite, her attorney hands folded, her posture calm but determined. The lawyer slid a heavy folder toward her, the tab marked Security Footage and Complaints. He spoke quietly, his tone measured. "They want to settle. Money, a quiet end." Amara shook her head, slow and deliberate. "I don't want silence. I want the truth out there." The lawyer exhaled, flipping through the folder, each page a reminder of the battle ahead. This case could change everything, but it's not going to be easy. Outside, the muffled sounds of the city drifted in, distant sirens, the hum of traffic, a reminder that the world was still moving, even as everything in this room felt suspended. Amara's gaze was steady, unwavering. "We'll take it public," she said. "No more hiding." The lawyer nodded, reaching for his phone to snap photos of the evidence, each click adding weight to their case. A secretary passed by the open door, her eyes flicking to the folder before moving on, her expression unreadable. The tension in the office was thick, but Amara's resolve was thicker. She repeated the words softly, almost to herself. "Truth over money." The lawyer closed the folder, the sound echoing in the small room. "Then we prepare," he said. Amara stood, the weight of the coming fight settling on her shoulders, but her spirit remained unbroken. As she left, the office door closed behind her with a soft click, a quiet but unmistakable signal that a new chapter was beginning, and this time, she would not be silenced. David sat at his cluttered desk, the newsroom humming with late-night energy. The video file glowed on his screen, cursor hovering over the send button. He replayed the footage once more. Whitlock's dismissive gestures, the barista's anxious glances, Amara's unwavering calm. Every detail was there, undeniable. David's phone buzzed with a text from Amara. "It's time." He didn't hesitate. With a deep breath, he attached the file, typed the headline, Bean Bliss bigotry, and hit send. The email whooshed away, a digital arrow aimed at the heart of the problem. He poured himself a shot of whiskey, the glass clinking softly on the desk. Around him, other reporters glanced over, sensing something big was about to break. David's Editor poked his head in, eyebrows raised. Are you sure about this? David nodded, voice steady. It's the truth. The editor gave a short nod, then disappeared down the hallway, already on his phone. As the upload confirmation flashed, David leaned back, feeling the weight of what he'd just done. The newsroom's energy shifted, reporters whispering, screens lighting up as the story began to spread. Across the city, phones buzzed, notifications pinged, and the footage started to circulate. Amara's voice measured, clear-cut through the noise, her words echoing in living rooms and coffee shops alike. David watched the first retweets roll in, the hashtag trending within minutes. He knew there would be backlash, but he also knew that truth was finally out in the open. He glanced at the clock, then at the empty glass, and allowed himself a small, tired smile. The story was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who needed to see it. Outside, the city lights blinked, and somewhere, change had already begun. Within hours, social media erupted. Memes and screenshots of the video flooded timelines. Whitlock's face superimposed on protest signs, captions reading, "No room for hate." Teenagers outside Bean Bliss held up handmade posters chanting, their voices bouncing off brick walls. Elena, the barista, texted Amara a photo. Whitlock hunched in the stockroom, head in his hands, while staff watched the footage loop on someone's phone. "He's not talking to anyone," Elena wrote. Amara replied, "Stay safe. I'm proud of you." A local artist projected the viral video onto City Hall after sunset, the images flickering across stone columns. Passers-by stopped, some cheering, others filming on their own devices. The hashtag #BeanBliss bigotry trended, joined by calls for boycotts and demands for accountability. News anchors debated the story on air, their voices sober, the footage replayed again and again. Whitlock's phone buzzed with messages, some angry, some mocking, some from old friends who now wanted nothing to do with him. He scrolled through them, jaw clenched, unable to look away. In the shop, customers debated quietly, some leaving their coffee untouched, others offering words of support to the staff. Elena handed out free pastries, her hands shaking but her smile genuine. Amara watched the storm unfold from her living room, the glow of her phone lighting her determined expression. She answered messages from strangers and friends alike, each one a reminder that the truth had finally found its audience. The shop, once a place of routine and exclusion, had become the epicenter of a movement. The city felt different, charged, awake, unwilling to let this moment pass without change. For the first time, Amara felt the tide turning, and she knew there was no going back. Grace stared at her phone, thumb hovering over her father's profile. The news was everywhere. Her friends had tagged her in the video, asking, "Isn't that your dad?" She scrolled through comments. Anger, disappointment, disbelief. Whitlock's latest post was a defensive rant, the words, "desperate." Grace's jaw tightened. She tapped, "Unfriend," a quiet confirmation flashing on the screen. Her profile, picture Black Lives Matter, fist seemed to glow brighter in the digital light. A message from Whitlock popped up. "You'll understand when you're older." Grace read it twice, the words hollow. She started to reply, then deleted the draft. Instead, she opened her photo album, deleting every family picture with his face in it. Her friends messaged support, some sending heart emojis, others just saying, "We're with you." Downstairs, her roommate watched the news, volume low. "You okay?" she asked. Grace nodded, but her eyes were wet. I can't believe it's him." Her roommate handed her a mug of tea, squeezing her shoulder. "You did the right thing." Whitlock sat in his office, staring at the notification. "Grace has unfriended you." He refreshed the page, hoping it was a mistake, but her name was gone. His hand shook as he set his phone down, the room suddenly colder. He tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. Grace turned off her phone, curling up on the couch. She felt lighter, but the ache in her chest lingered. She knew this was more than a digital gesture. It was a line drawn, a choice made. Her father's world had shrunk, and she was no longer a part of it. In the quiet, she whispered, "It's over," letting the words settle in the space between grief and relief. The office phone blinked with a relentless red light, each flash a silent accusation. Amara sat at the conference table, a legal pad in front of her, listening as the first message played. A woman's voice trembled. "My daughter was humiliated in your store. I want answers." The next caller was angrier, demanding, "Shut it down! We won't stand for this!" Some messages were quiet, almost pleading, recounting stories of exclusion and shame. Amara jotted down names, her pen moving steadily as the voices piled up. One after another, the messages played. A father described his son's tears after being turned away. A former employee recounted being told to watch certain customers. The pain in their words was raw, each story a piece of the larger truth Amara had been fighting to expose. The secretary passed by the door, pausing just long enough to meet Amara's eyes, her expression a mix of sympathy and exhaustion. Near the end, the tone shifted. A corporate executive's voice, clipped and impatient, ordered, "Handle this. Make it go away." Amara's jaw tightened. She let the messages run, not skipping a single one. The final call played, quieter than the rest. Whitlock's voice, strained and broken, barely above a whisper. "This is your fault." The words hung in the air, heavy with blame and regret. Amara clicked off the speaker, the office suddenly too quiet. She looked at her notes, the legal pad filled with stories that could no longer be ignored. The blinking light faded, replaced by a steady resolve. The pleas had been unheard for too long. Now, Amara was ready to answer them all, one by one, with the truth. Whitlock stood alone behind the counter, the shop empty except for the low hum of the refrigerator. He wiped down the espresso machine with slow, deliberate strokes. The steam, long gone. The closed sign swung gently in the window, catching the last of the afternoon light. He reached for a sugar packet, turning it over in his hands. The logo faded from years of use. His shoulders slumped as he glanced around at the empty tables, chairs stacked for the night. Outside, a muralist worked on the brick wall, painting Amara's face in bold colors. Whitlock watched through the glass, his reflection barely visible against the growing image. He tried to focus on the routine cleaning the portafilter, wiping the counters, but his mind wandered to the messages, the headlines, the faces of customers he'd turned away. Each task felt heavier, the weight of consequence settling in his chest. A delivery driver knocked, dropping off a box of supplies. Whitlock signed for it without meeting the man's eyes. The driver offered a curt nod, then left, the door closing with a soft thud. Whitlock lingered at the window, watching the muralist's brushstrokes echo the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Steady, unrelenting, final. He pocketed the sugar packet, unable to throw it away. The espresso machine sat silent, its purpose spent. Whitlock turned off the lights. The shop bathed in dusk. He paused at the door, looking back one last time. The mural outside was nearly finished, Amara's gaze meeting him through the glass. For a moment, he stood motionless, the truth of his downfall painted larger than life. Then he stepped into the evening, the shop behind him quiet, the future uncertain and unwelcoming. The morning of the press conference arrived with a crispness in the air, and the scent of fresh paint still lingering outside Bean Bliss. Amara stood near the entrance, watching workers adjust the new sign, their hands steady as they wiped away the last smudges. Reporters gathered in clusters, microphones in hand, their eyes darting between Amara and the shop's entrance. Whitlock lingered inside, his suit jacket rumpled, sweat beading along his hairline. He straightened his tie, glancing at his lawyer, who whispered instructions and handed him a stack of prepared notes. The corporate logo above the door flickered, the neon struggling to stay bright. Amara's heel tapped once on the stone step, a quiet rhythm of anticipation. The barista, Elena, peeked out from behind the counter, her apron freshly pressed, a nervous smile exchanged with Amara. The crowd outside swelled as more cameras arrived, the buzz of anticipation growing louder. A reporter called out, "Ms. Hughes, will you be making a statement?" Amara nodded, her voice even. In a few minutes, she glanced at the muralist, who was adding the final touches to her portrait on the wall. The image was bold, confident, a stark contrast to the tension inside the shop. Whitlock's lawyer leaned in, voice low. "Stick to the notes. No improvising." Whitlock nodded, jaw clenched, his hand shaking as he gripped the paper. The air felt thick, every eye waiting for the first word. Amara took a breath, her posture tall, letting the weight of the moment settle. The new sign gleamed in the sunlight, a symbol of change and reckoning. As the cameras focused, Amara stepped forward, the crowd falling silent. The stage was set, the scars of the past visible but no longer hidden. Today, the truth would be spoken, and nothing would be the same again. A hush fell as the first reporter stepped forward, microphone raised, the cord trailing across the pavement. Static crackled, then faded. "Why target black customers?" the reporter asked, voice cutting through the crowd. Whitlock's hand trembled, his wedding band making a dull tap on the podium. He cleared his throat, searching for words. The détenu scent of sweat and cologne mingled, sharp in the morning air. Whitlock's lawyer shifted beside him, eyes narrowed, lips pressed thin. Amara stood a few feet away, her expression unreadable. The crowd leaned in, the tension thick enough to feel. Whitlock finally spoke, voice thin. It was just business decisions, standard practice. The words fell flat, met with a ripple of disbelief from the audience. A flyer fluttered down, landing at Whitlock's feet. "Boycott Bean Bliss." He stared at it, jaw clenched, unable to look up. Elena, the barista, stood near the door, her hands twisting a towel, eyes shining with unshed tears. A young staff member behind her whispered, "He never thought he'd have to answer for it." Elena nodded, her gaze fixed on Amara, hope flickering in her eyes. The reporter pressed, "Do you regret your actions?" Whitlock hesitated, then shook his head, voice barely audible. I thought it was the right thing for the business." Another journalist scribbled furiously, capturing every word. Amara's heel tapped once, the sound sharp, her presence a silent challenge. The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads, others exchanging glances. The power in the space had shifted. Whitlock's authority was unraveling, exposed under the scrutiny of cameras and questions. Amara remained steady, her calm a stark contrast to Whitlock's unraveling composure. The press conference had only just begun, but the truth was already changing everything. Amara stepped forward, the microphone cool in her hand, her gaze sweeping the crowd. The reporters quieted, their pens poised. She took a breath, her voice steady. "Racism isn't a business model." The words landed with a weight that made even the cameras pause. Whitlock stood behind her, shoulders tense, his lawyer clutching a folder of notes, but no one looked at them now. All eyes were on Amara. She continued, "Every person who walked into this shop deserved respect. That wasn't given. That changes today." The barista, Elena, watched from the doorway, her eyes shining with something like relief. A staff member in the back nodded, crossing his arms, finally standing a little taller. Amara's words were clear, measured, each sentence a quiet reckoning. A reporter asked, "What will you do now?" Amara didn't hesitate. "We rebuild. We hire with purpose. We listen." She looked at the crowd, meeting each gaze. "This isn't about one man. It's about a system that lets this happen. We're done with that." Whitlock shifted, his mouth opening as if to speak, but nothing came. Amara didn't turn. She finished. "Dignity is not negotiable. Not here, not anymore." The crowd murmured, a ripple of approval passing through. Elena stepped forward, handing Amara a latte, the foam art shaped like a raised fist. Amara accepted it, holding the cup up for all to see. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment. Amara set the cup down, her voice soft but firm. we belong. The press conference moved on, but the atmosphere had changed. The power in the room belonged to those who had been denied, and Amara stood at the center, unshaken, her truth echoing long after the microphones were turned off. The corporate logo above the stage flickered, casting jagged shadows across the press crowd. Whitlock reached for the glass of water at his side, his wedding ring scraping against it, the sound sharp in the quiet. His hand shook as he tried to steady himself, the rim of the glass tapping nervously on the podium. Amara stood, nearby, her eyes on the crowd, not on him. The tension in the air was electric, every camera focused on the shifting light. A technician at the edge of the stage checked the wiring, glancing up as the neon sign sputtered again. The barista Elena, watching from the doorway, caught Amara's eye and offered a small, reassuring nod. Amara returned it, her expression composed, steady as ever. Whitlock's lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgent, but Whitlock barely heard him. The sign above them buzzed, then dimmed, leaving half the letters glowing, the rest swallowed in shadow. Amara nodded to a staff member who moved quietly to the power switch. With a single motion, the plug was pulled. The logo's last light blinked out, plunging Whitlock's side of the stage into darkness. The cameras shifted, focusing on Amara, now illuminated by the natural light pouring through the shop's windows. Whitlock's face was barely visible, his features blurred by the sudden loss of spotlight. He looked down, hands gripping the podium, knuckles white. The crowd murmured, the symbolism clear. The era of his control was over, the darkness a public admission of failure. Amara stood tall, framed by sunlight, her presence now the center of attention. The press conference continued, but the message was unmistakable. The power had shifted, quietly and completely, and everyone in the room felt the change. The last flicker of neon justice had given way to something real. Amara took a step forward as the old sign was lowered, replaced by a new one gleaming in the sunlight, Bean and Belonging. The crowd outside the shop erupted in applause, the sound rolling down the street. Whitlock's lawyer pushed a stack of legal documents toward her, his voice low and urgent. "Just sign these and we can make it all go away." Amara didn't look at him. She reached for the papers, tore them in half without hesitation, and let the pieces drift to the ground like confetti. The staff gathered behind her, a diverse group, some in crisp new uniforms, others still in street clothes, all united in their relief and hope. Elena, the barista, stepped to the front, her hands steady now, and nodded at Amara. The crowd's energy shifted, a sense of celebration replacing the tension that had filled the air moments before. A toddler in the front row waved a sippy cup decorated with a Black Lives Matter sticker, her mother lifting her up to see the new sign. Amara smiled, her eyes shining with pride and determination. She spoke, her voice carrying over the applause. "This is for everyone who was told they didn't belong, for every story that was dismissed. We're starting over, together." The cameras flashed, capturing the moment as staff members hugged, some wiping away tears. Whitlock stood off to the side, shoulders hunched, watching as his former employees embraced the change. The new sign caught the light, its message clear and bold. Amara turned to her team, her voice soft but resolute. "Let's get to work." The doors opened, and the first customer stepped inside, greeted with genuine warmth. The shop felt different, lighter, open, filled with possibility. The rebrand was more than a new name. It was a promise kept. The lawyer leaned in close to Whitlock, voice barely above a whisper, urgency sharpening every word. "Sign, or we'll bury you in court filings." Whitlock's hands shook as he gathered the torn pages Amara had discarded, the jagged edges scratching his skin. He tried to piece them together, but the words were lost, the contract now meaningless. Amara watched from a distance, her gaze unwavering, the staff behind her drawing strength from her calm. Elena, mop in hand, stepped forward to clean up the scraps, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. She glanced at Amara, who nodded in silent appreciation. The janitor, Derek, The former night guard returned for the first time since his resignation, pushing his cart past the crowd. He paused, meeting Whitlock's eyes for a brief moment, then continued on, his presence a quiet reminder of the cost of conscience. Whitlock slumped in his chair, ink from the torn NDA staining his cuff. He stared at his hands, the blue smudges, a mark he couldn't wash away. The lawyer gathered the remaining documents, frustration etched into every line of his face. "You've lost control," he muttered, but Whitlock didn't respond. The power he once wielded had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of irrelevance. Amara approached the recycle bin labeled "New Beginnings" and dropped the shredded contract inside. The staff watched as the pieces settled, a symbolic end to the old order. The room was filled with the quiet hum of possibility, the tension replaced by anticipation. As the press conference wound down, Amara's team gathered around her, ready to move forward. Whitlock remained at the edge, isolated and diminished, the stains on his cuff a silent testament to everything he'd lost. The era of fear and silence was over. Something new had begun. Whitlock slipped out the side door as the press conference ended, the noise of celebration fading behind him. The alley was narrow, littered with discarded cups and the faint smell of old coffee grounds. He paused, leaning against the cold brick, his breath unsteady. A homeless man sat nearby, sorting through a bag of cans. Their eyes met for a moment, and the man tossed a crumpled paper cup at Whitlock's feet. "Keep the change," he muttered, voice rough but not unkind. Whitlock stared at the cup, the shop's faded logo barely visible. He bent to pick it up, hands shaking, and caught his reflection in a puddle. The water was slick with oil, swirling rainbows distorting his features. He barely recognized himself. Graffiti on the wall behind him showed Amara's face, painted in bold strokes, her eyes steady and unyielding. The mural seemed to watch him, a silent witness to his fall. He closed his eyes, the weight of guilt settling in his chest. Every decision, every moment of exclusion replayed in his mind. The laughter and applause from the street drifted over the rooftops, a reminder of the world moving on without him. Whitlock's phone buzzed. Another message he couldn't bring himself to read. He dropped the cup in a nearby bin, the sound echoing in the empty alley. The homeless man watched, shaking his head. "You look tired," he said quietly. Whitlock didn't answer. He straightened his jacket, trying to regain some sense of dignity, but the gesture felt hollow. The mural's gaze followed him as he walked away, his footsteps muffled by damp pavement. The alley swallowed him, the celebration now a distant memory. Guilt lingered, sharp and bitter, as he disappeared into the city's shadows. The street outside Bean and Belonging pulsed with energy. Protesters lined the sidewalk, their voices rising in unison. "Hey, hey, ho, ho, racist coffee's got to go!" The chant echoed off storefronts, drawing more onlookers. Teenagers waved handmade signs, some painted with Amara's face, others with bold calls for justice. A group of students held up iPads, replaying the viral footage on loop for anyone passing by. A police officer stood nearby, shifting from foot to foot, his badge catching the sunlight. He watched the crowd but made no move to intervene. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful, the sense of collective purpose unmistakable. Elena, now in her new uniform, stepped outside with a tray of steaming drinks. She handed out free unity lattes, each cup stamped with the word "belong." The protesters cheered, some reaching for the cups, others snapping photos to share online. A mother lifted her young daughter onto her shoulders, the child waving a tiny flag. Amara watched from the doorway, her heart pounding with pride and gratitude. She caught Elena's eye, exchanging a smile that spoke of relief and new beginnings. The staff gathered behind her, arms linked, their faces alight with hope. The chant grew louder, the crowd swelling as more people joined. Cars honked in support, drivers raising fists out their windows. The shop, once a symbol of exclusion, now stood as a beacon for change. Amara stepped forward, raising her hand in a quiet salute. The crowd responded with applause. The verdict clear. The old ways were finished. Justice had found its voice, and the people had delivered their answer. Whitlock wandered behind the building, away from the noise and the crowd. He spotted a chipped Bean Bliss mug in the trash, its handle broken, logo faded. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands, thumb tracing the outline of what used to be his pride. With a sudden surge of frustration, he hurled it against the brick wall. The mug shattered, pieces scattering across the pavement. Among the shards, the letters BLM stood out, formed by the way the fragments landed. He stared at the broken pieces, chest tight, breath shallow. A street sweeper rounded the corner, pausing to look at the mess. The worker shook his head, then methodically swept the fragments into a dustpan, erasing the last physical trace of Whitlock's ownership. The distant sound of chanting and applause drifted over the alley, a sharp contrast to the emptiness around him. Whitlock's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, eyes scanning the screen. A foreclosure alert. The final blow. His hand trembled as he read the message, realization settling like a stone in his gut. He slid the phone away, unable to face the digital reminders of everything he'd lost. He looked up at the sky, gray and unyielding. The mural of Amara on the building's side caught the last rays of sunlight, her face bright and determined. Whitlock's shoulders sagged. He turned away from the mural, the applause and chants growing fainter as he walked toward the empty street. The broken mug, the swept-away pieces, the loss of his store, it all marked the end of his reign. Whitlock moved on, each step heavier than the last. The world he'd controlled was gone, replaced by something he could never reclaim. Amara locked the front door of Bean & Belonging as the last customer waved goodbye. The golden light of sunset spilling across the sidewalk. She paused outside, turning to look at the new mural. Her father's face smiling beside hers, his arm around a young customer who'd once been denied service. The colors glowed, alive with hope. The city's hum softened in the evening air, the voices of protesters replaced by laughter and quiet conversation from the reopened shop. She jingled the new keys in her hand, the sound crisp and bright. Elena joined her on the steps, wiping her hands on her apron, a look of contentment on her face. "We did it," Elena said softly. Amara smiled, her eyes shining. "We did." Across the street, Whitlock's shadow slipped past the mural, small and hunched. He didn't look up, his figure shrinking as he disappeared into the subway entrance. Amara watched him go, feeling no anger, only a sense of closure. The past had lost its hold. Inside, the staff gathered around the community table, sharing stories and plans for tomorrow. Amara glanced through the window, seeing their faces reflected in the glass, each one a part of the new beginning. She stepped back inside, the door closing gently behind her. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Amara whispered, "This is what belonging feels like." The mural caught the last light, her father's smile lingering as a promise. The shop, once a place of exclusion, now glowed with welcome. Amara stood in the doorway, letting the warmth of the moment settle in her chest. The city moved on, but something fundamental had shifted. Justice had arrived quietly, not with shouts, but with open doors and shared light. Amara's story was no longer just hers, it belonged to everyone who'd ever been told they didn't fit. Whitlock stepped into his house, the echo of his own footsteps greeting him in a space that felt emptier than ever before. On the kitchen table, a single envelope waited, his wife's handwriting on the front, her wedding ring beside it. He opened the letter, reading her words. "I can't do this anymore. I need to find peace." His hands trembled as he set the paper down, the ring glinting in the afternoon light. He wandered through the rooms, noticing the missing family photos, the empty closet where her clothes used to hang, the absence of laughter that once filled the air. The silence pressed in, heavy and unyielding. He sat at his desk, opening his laptop out of habit, and stared at his LinkedIn profile. With a few slow keystrokes, he updated his status to retired. The word stared back at him, hollow and final. He scrolled through old messages, seeing friends and former colleagues distance themselves, their replies short or non-existent. The house, once a place of comfort and pride, now felt like a museum of regrets. He lingered in the doorway of his daughter's room, the bed neatly made, her childhood trophies collecting dust. He reached for a photo of them together, then set it back, unable to face the memories. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic outside. Whitlock leaned against the wall, eyes closed, the weight of his choices settling on his shoulders. The world he'd built, his family, his business, his reputation had unraveled, leaving him with nothing but empty rooms and a future he could no longer imagine. He sat at the kitchen table as the sun faded, the envelope and ring before him, the silence absolute. For the first time, Whitlock understood what it meant to lose everything. Amara arrived at the shop before sunrise, unlocking the doors as a soft glow crept across the city streets. She arranged chairs in a neat row, setting out a stack of applications and a tray of fresh pastries. By the time the first rays of sunlight spilled through the windows, a line had already formed outside, young people with hopeful eyes, older applicants with resumes clutched in hand, parents with children in tow. She greeted each person warmly, shaking hands and offering coffee. Some faces were familiar people who had once been turned away or overlooked under Whitlock's management. Others were new, drawn by the promise of change. A nervous teenager fumbled her paperwork. Amara smiled, steady and encouraging. "Take your time. We're here for more than experience. We want your story." Inside, Elena helped set up, her laughter brightening the room. She chatted with applicants, sharing her own journey from barista to shift leader. The atmosphere buzzed with possibility, the air lighter than it had ever been. Amara moved from table to table, listening to each person's hopes and ideas. She saw the pride in a father's eyes as his daughter interviewed, the relief in a mother's smile as she was welcomed without judgment. As the morning wore on, Amara marked not just skills, but resilience and kindness. She made notes on the back of application stories of perseverance, moments of courage. The staff gathered during a break, reviewing the stack of candidates. "We're building something new," Amara said quietly. "Second chances are our foundation." By noon, the shop was filled with laughter and conversation. The job fair wasn't just about hiring, it was about rewriting the story of being and belonging. Amara watched the sunlight move across the floor, grateful for the future unfolding in front of her. The muralist worked with careful strokes, painting Amara's likeness across the brick wall outside Bean and Belonging. Her eyes were bright, her smile resolute, colors bold against the city's gray. Passers-by paused to watch, some snapping photos, others simply taking in the transformation. The mural grew each hour, becoming a landmark for the neighborhood. Whitlock shuffled past one. "Morning," head lowered, shoulders hunched. He glanced up just long enough to see his own reflection swallowed by the painted crowd behind Amara. A group of children pointed at the mural, their laughter echoing down the block. Tourists stopped to pose for selfies. The wall behind them, alive with hope and pride. Inside the shop, Elena wiped down tables and watched the scene through the window. She smiled, remembering how the same wall had once been bare, unnoticed. Now it drew people in, a symbol of justice and belonging. Amara stepped outside during a break, standing quietly as the artist added the final touches to her portrait. The muralist nodded, stepping back to admire the work. "You change things," he said simply. Amara nodded, her voice soft. "We all did." A local news crew arrived, interviewing customers who lingered by the mural. One woman, holding her child's hand, said, "It's about time we see faces like ours celebrated." The mural's colors caught the sun, casting a warm glow on everyone who passed. Amara watched as people from all walks of life gathered, united by the story now written in paint. Whitlock, nearly invisible in the crowd, felt the shift. The mural was more than art. It was a public reckoning, a promise that the city would remember what had changed and who had made it possible. Justice had found a new canvas, and the world was watching. Tourists flocked to Bean and Belonging, their cameras, ready as they gathered in front of the vibrant mural. The wall had become a destination, a backdrop for celebration and solidarity. Friends posed with arms around each other, families arranged their children in front of Amara's painted smile, and activists left bouquets of flowers at the mural's base. The air buzzed with laughter and the click of camera shutters, each snapshot capturing a piece of the story that had changed the city. Social media feeds filled with photos and hashtags, the mural's colors spreading far beyond the neighborhood. Posts read, "Came for coffee, stayed for hope, and this is what change looks like." Influencers and community leaders tagged the location, their followers sharing the message, "Everyone belongs here now." News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting images of the mural and the crowds gathered beneath it. Inside the shop, Amara watched the steady stream of visitors through the window. She saw strangers striking up conversations, sharing stories of exclusion and resilience over steaming cups of coffee. Elena handed out drinks with a smile, her pride unmistakable. The staff moved with new confidence, their efforts recognized by the world outside. A group of teenagers took turns snapping selfies, holding up peace signs, and grinning wide. One girl whispered to her friend, "I want to work here someday." The mural had become more than art. It was a symbol of what was possible when justice and belonging took root. Amara stepped outside, joining a family for a photo. Her presence met with cheers. As the sun dipped lower, the mural glowed in the golden light, a beacon for all who passed. The world had taken notice, and Bean and belonging stood as proof that change, once begun, could not be turned back. Whitlock moved slowly down the sidewalk, his gaze fixed on the ground as he passed Bean and belonging. The crowd outside barely registered his presence. No one turned. No one called his name. He glanced up just once at the mural, searching for his own reflection among the painted faces, but found only the bright eyes and hopeful smiles of others. His shoulders sagged. The laughter and chatter that filled the air seemed to push him further away with every step. A group of tourists snapped photos, their backs to him, focused on capturing the mural's message. A young boy pointed at Amara's image and asked, his mother, "Who is she?" The woman replied, "She changed everything here." Whitlock's chest tightened at the words, but he kept walking, unnoticed and unremarkable. Inside the shop, Elena caught a glimpse of him through the window and hesitated, a momentary flicker of recognition crossing her face, before she turned back to her work. The new staff, busy with customers, didn't even glance his way. The shop that had once been his domain now buzzed with a warmth he could no longer claim. Whitlock paused at the edge of the block, looking back one last time. The mural's colors seemed brighter, the crowd livelier. He realized he was a stranger, in a place he had ruled for years. The world had moved on without him, filling the space he left with voices and faces he'd never truly seen. He turned away, his footsteps muffled by the noise of the city. Regret clung to him, heavy and cold, as he disappeared into the crowd. For the first time, Whitlock understood what it meant to be invisible, not by choice, but by consequence. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Amara's new office, casting a warm glow over the space. The walls were lined with photos of staff celebrations and community events, each one a reminder of how far the shop had come. Amara sat at her desk, her father's smiling portrait propped beside her laptop. The office buzzed with quiet energy. As staff filtered in for the morning meeting, their voices filled with optimism. Elena led the discussion, her confidence evident as she outlined plans for the upcoming community fundraiser. A former applicant, now the morning shift lead, shared ideas for new menu items, his enthusiasm infectious. Amara listened, nodding, encouraging every suggestion. The room was alive with laughter, the kind that comes from being welcomed and valued. Every voice mattered here. A knock at the door signaled the arrival of a local teacher, dropping off thank-you notes from her students. Amara greeted her warmly, accepting the stack of colorful cards. "Your shop is their favorite place now," the teacher said, smiling. Amara felt a surge of pride, knowing the space had become more than just a business. It was a haven. As the meeting wrapped up, Amara looked around the office, taking in the sunlight, the faces of her team, the energy of possibility. The shop's transformation was visible in every detail. The open-door policy, the diverse staff, the laughter that echoed down the hallways. Second chances weren't just offered, they were celebrated. Amara stood, thanking everyone for their hard work. The staff lingered, sharing stories and plans for the future. The office felt alive, every corner humming with hope. Amara glanced at her father's photo, whispering, "We did it." The sunlight lingered, a gentle promise that the best was yet to come. The long wooden table at the center of Bean and Belonging was alive with conversation. Customers from every walk of life gathered over steaming mugs, sharing stories and laughter. Amara moved quietly among them, pausing to refill a cup or listen to a memory. She smiled as a former applicant, now leading the morning shift, welcomed a group of newcomers with genuine warmth. A young mother recounted her first visit, how she'd been nervous but was greeted with kindness. An elderly man described the changes he'd witnessed, his voice cracking as he thanked the staff for making him feel seen. Elena joined the table, balancing a tray of pastries, her laughter ringing out as she swapped stories with regulars. The sense of belonging was palpable, woven into every gesture and word. Amara settled at the end of the table, content to observe the scene. She watched as a teenager, once overlooked for a job, now confidently trained a new hire. The staff moved. With ease, their camaraderie evident in the way they supported one another. Every cup served was more than just coffee. It was an invitation to be part of something larger. The mood in the shop was warm and inclusive, the barriers of the past replaced by genuine connection. Customers lingered long after their drinks were finished, drawn by the sense of community that filled the air. Amara caught Elena's eye, sharing a quiet nod of gratitude. The shop had become what she'd always hoped, a place where everyone belonged. As the afternoon sun filtered through the windows, the community table remained full, a living symbol of the shop's transformation. Amara listened, her heart full, knowing that justice had taken root not in grand gestures, but in every shared story and every cup placed gently on the table. As dusk settled over the city, Amara stood by the window, the last light casting golden patterns across the shop floor. Inside, the hum of quiet conversation lingered, the day's laughter and stories echoing in the warm air. She watched the mural outside glow in the fading sun, her father's smile, her own determined gaze, the faces of those who had once been, turned away now shining for all to see. She took a slow breath, her reflection blending with the mural in the glass. Her voice, calm and steady, filled the room. "They tried to refuse my service, so I served them the truth." The words carried, soft but unyielding, settling over every table, every chair, every heart that had found a home inside Bean and Belonging. The staff gathered near the counter, Elena offering a final wave as she locked the register. Customers lingered at the community table, reluctant to leave the comfort of shared company. Outside, a group of children posed for a photo in front of the mural, their laughter floating through the open door. Amara turned off the lights one by one, the shop bathed in gentle twilight. She paused at the door, looking back at the space, transformed by justice and care. The city beyond was alive with possibility, the story of Bean and Belonging now woven into its fabric. She stepped outside, locking the door behind her, the mural's colors vivid in the evening glow. The truth had been served, quietly and completely. Justice had come not with noise, but with open doors, shared tables, and the promise that everyone belonged. Amara walked into the night, her heart light, knowing the work would continue and that change, once started, could not be undone.